What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Beach Boys album ranking video. Today we're up to number 2 out of 30, the second best. The last two spots that everybody has been waiting for and everybody has known that they're coming. But I think the biggest question was which one was I gonna put over the other, because most fans generally consider these two albums, these two bodies of work created by Brian Wilson at a time where he was just experiencing a musical explosion. Just from about 1963 to 1966, 67, Brian Wilson was absolutely on fire. I'd probably say 63 to 68. Completely just on fucking fire, but specifically in 66, 67, Brian tuned into something with Tony Asher and Van Dyke Parts on two different albums, and in today's video, number 2, the first Beach Boys album I ever listened to, the thing that made me interested in them in the first place, Pet Sounds, released on May 16th, 1966. So, I think for this specific review, I'm not going to go into the history of this album or the first one. I think they're pretty generally well talked about, and I would spend way too long trying to get into every nook and cranny of what this album stemmed from. So if you guys don't know, check Wikipedia. It's great. They say a lot of information. The movie Love and Mercy with Paul Dano playing young Brian Wilson shows what it would have been like to be in the studio at that time when this album was being recorded. But to put it simply, Brian heard Rubber Soul by the Beatles in late 65, thought it was brilliant, and wanted to make an album of all good songs that would top Rubber Soul. So in late 65, well, stemming from sessions starting in the middle of 65 all the way to early 1966, he wrote this record mainly with Tony Asher, who was I think just some promoter dude. I don't think he was even really in the music business, but you know, they got together, they had a good connection and wrote some songs and made a fucking masterpiece, man. And this record to me truly embodies life for me. I've never felt so close and so in tune with any album in my life. And I remember when I first heard it, I'll just, besides the backstory of the album, I'll just go back to my backstory of this band and this album. I always knew of the Beach Boys since I was a little kid. I knew the really popular songs, but I never really gave them a serious look. Not that I thought anything down on them. I thought they sounded good, but I just never really got into them. But then at some point, this is when I was starting to branch out, maybe 2019, 2020. I was looking all over RollingStone.com, all these places like best albums of all time, and I see Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys. I'm just like, alright, man, never fucking heard it. At that point, I'd been getting into the Beatles a lot, so I'd probably been listening to them for a couple months. Because at that time, I was a huge metalhead and just do a bunch of death metal and thrash metal, all that type of shit. But something about Pet Sounds by the Beach Boys caught my interest. So I listened to it in my math class, I think sophomore year for the first time, and I don't think I really understood it. I think I went over my head at first. I don't think I disliked it, I just don't think I really got it. I thought it was good, but I was like, alright, and I didn't really think any mind to it for a while. And then some point around late 2020, I listened to it again, and for Christmas my grandpa got me Pet Sounds. It's the 2016 stereo reissue on vinyl, and that changed a lot for me because I had never heard the album in stereo. Not that I'd ever noticed anything about the way I was hearing it, but this is before I understood the difference between mono and stereo and music and the history of music production and the different eras of music. So I was just learning it, and once Pet Sounds started making more sense to me, hearing the record on vinyl with the great stereo master that it is, it sounds really good. One night it just a song clicked and the next song clicked, and after a while I just became obsessed with it, and I started listening to them a lot, starting from Surfin' Safari to every album after that. And I'm really glad I did that because I ended up with continuing throughout their entire discography over the course of like 3 months just to finish. And I did, and I didn't like everything at first, but the more and more I listened, the more and more I noticed, and the more and more I took in each individual member's voice and their contributions, and Brian Wilson's fucking musical expertise changed my life. But this was the one that started it all for me. And this one right here, this copy I have, is actually an original LA mono first press, which I probably paid too much money for, but I really wanted to have it. And, you know, it's unassuming. I can imagine buying this in 1966 when it came out. It just looks strange. Like, a lot of people say the album covers, for one of the best albums ever made, it's one of the worst album covers. I don't agree. I mean, for me, it's iconic. I've always seen it around, and it's what I'm used to. It's what we're all used to. So, you know, it looks normal, and it looks cool to me. But, you know, that's debatable. But at the time, the band didn't have control of their cover arts. They didn't really have control of their artistic or their commercial direction. Capitol pretty much did it all for them. Capitol didn't really put too much effort in this album. And it's really sad because Brian put his entire heart and soul into this record, and I think part of the reason he didn't continue on with Smile and why he started to retreat more from the music industry is he put everything into this album, his entire fucking mind and heart at the time, and he thought people would really, really love it and understand it, and it went to number 10 on the charts in 1966 in America, which, I mean, it's number 10, it's still top 10, it's not bad, but it was lower than all their other albums that came before it, and it got mixed reviews and reactions in the US at the time, and that crushed him. That like killed a lot of his spirit for a while, which was real sad. So who knows what would have happened if it caught on earlier. But you know what I think is, because it didn't catch on instantly, it shows that he was ahead of its time. He shows that he was doing something that 50, almost 60 years later, we're still looking back and saying that's phenomenal. So I applaud that very much. But you know, man, just looking at the pictures on this record, seeing 23-year-old Brian, all I gotta say about this one, I've listened to this fucking album hundreds of times, and it just gets better every time. I notice details every single time that I would have never heard before, and I just think it's truly a must-listen for anybody who's into music. It's such a perfect blend of lush, beautiful, upbeat pop, but also intertwined with like melodramatic, youthful, you know, very relatable dark lyrics at points, with the fucking beautiful sound of the records and their harmonies. Like, it's such a one-of-a-kind experience in their discography and within the entire popular music landscape, but especially for the Beach Boys. You know, Brian Wilson was already a fucking champ, you know, writing and producing hit after hit and album and doing tours, and then he couldn't take the touring anymore, and that's when his musical artistry started taking a notch up. So 1965, you had Summer Days, Summer Nights, Beach Boys Today, fucking awesome albums with amazing musical innovation. And even then, compared to a lot of the sounds you were hearing from, you know, the contemporaries, which was a much more contained rock band doing their thing, the Beach Boys were expanding into more orchestral territory, and they, I think, peak in terms, Brian's fullest vision he ever fully realized was this record. And when I get to review number 1, which you guys all know what it's gonna be, I will explain my differences between each of the projects that he made during those time periods and what's different about them and what they share. But I think they're both represent something different. They represent a very troubled man growing up in his life, dealing with fame and mental illness and abuse, and a lot of things going on, and drugs starting to take over more. And he just really found an outlet with Tony Asher to help convey his emotions in the lyrics and the words. You know, him and Mike Love had minor contributions here or there, but musically the entire album was Brian Wilson, with very, very minor musical credit by Tony Asher, but he did help contribute to some of the music, and I think 8 of the songs are lyrics with him. But Brian was completely in charge in the studio, using musicians from the Wrecking Crew, while the rest of the guys were in tour in Japan, which you can see in the pictures if you look around. Brian was not there with that tour, so while they were on the tour, he composed and arranged the backing tracks. They came back, they heard them. Mostly they were thrilled about it, but they were still confused because it was like nothing they heard before. There's a lot of rumors about Mike Love saying very down things about the project when it came, or when Brian showed it to them. I'm not sure. I wasn't there. Most of the people saying that weren't there. There's so many different accounts. Brian said a million different things. I love the guy. If I'm gonna be honest, he's one of the least. You don't get the same answers from him. I think his mind is in a lot of places, and you know what I'm saying. For Beach Boys fans who watch Brian Wilson interviews, not that he's purposely lying or anything. I just think his mind's all over the place and memories get jumbled or something like that. I love you, Brian, man. But anyway, I'm sorry. This fucking album is brilliant. This fucking album is really brilliant, and this, regardless of what the other members thought of Brian's creation, the truth is that his mind was going in different directions at the time. He really, really wanted to fulfill just a need to express himself, and with so much going on in the music industry at the time, he really respected the Beatles, he idolized Phil Spector, and he just wanted to take Phil Spector's recording style, The Wall of Sound, and do his own thing with it and take it to a level that has never been achieved or had never been achieved at the time, but to this day, we still haven't heard anything like this record. But he started to get into a lot of different music at this time. Him and Tony Asher were listening to a lot of more classical, blues, jazz music, and that inspired Brian to start incorporating more unusual instruments, more not even traditional instruments, things that would just not even be thought of as making noise. He would use in a musical way, like a can of Coke, which I did not intend to bring this or for this joke. I just had it here and that fucking worked out. But seriously, I'll let you listen to the song in the background a little bit just to hear what I'm talking about with the instruments. It's quiet, but you can get the idea that this record was something different. Something very different that nobody of that era had ever... Nobody at that time had heard an album like this. It hadn't been done. And I think what's so impressive about it is that it's so catchy, it's so easy to digest, and it's, well, not for everybody, but musically it's very pleasing to the ear. And I just think it's very relatable lyrically, and I think it just hits a certain chord within a lot of people. And I think that's one thing that this album achieved and that Brian Wilson achieved on this record that is my favorite thing in music, and it's very hard to achieve, but true emotion, true, honest, genuine emotion that comes from a deep and thoughtful place. I think it, as sad as it is, and as messed up as it is, a lot of the best artists of all time had very painful lives, lived very, very, not easygoing lives. They had a lot of shit going on, and Brian Wilson was no different with his abusive dad and the pressures of the world on him and just a lot of things going on, so it comes out and he really expresses himself here. And for me, I just connect to it so much to a point that I feel like this album is like an extension of myself, and I listen to this record. I could listen to this record daily and not get bored of it. I try to preserve my listens as much because it's so nice to not hear it for a while and then fresh ears. But regardless, it's beautiful music. If I just have to finish the review right now, if I was not going to say anything else, regardless if it's your style or not, you can't deny that what's put together is incredibly ambitious and insanely well done, well put together, well composed music. And I think it's just very beautiful. It's the most beautiful album I've ever heard. And seeing Brian Wilson come to a peak in his life like this, in terms of his artistic innovation and change, and what he was doing to represent himself as an artist, it captured something brilliant, and it inspired a ton of people. As I said earlier, it wasn't huge in America, but in the UK it was very big. It went to number two, and God Only Knows on this record went to number two over there as well. So it was very big over there. People in Europe really appreciated it, and it inspired the Beatles. It inspired the whole music scene to try to express themselves more. And this was right before the psychedelic rock scene really exploded. And while I wouldn't consider this a psychedelic rock album whatsoever, it definitely is eclectic to a more extreme degree, I think, than even a lot of psychedelic albums. Because even though the songs are very well written, well put together, well orchestrated, I think the choice of instrumentation and soundscape created and timings and rhythms, unlike anything else I've ever heard, man. And that's all I really got to say about the whole tonal quality of it. And I guess I just got to get into the song. So, opens up with Wouldn't It Be Nice, one of their most popular songs ever. It was released as a single after the album came out. Went to number 8 in America, I think. And this one is one I've known my entire life. Just, I haven't even thought about it as like a piece of art until, 3 years ago when I first got into them. Because, it was always just one of those songs that sounds like it's always existed. And I never really paid too close attention to it, along with a lot of their other stuff. I didn't know too many of their songs when I was a kid, but definitely that was one of them. So when I visited this album, it was like the perfect kickoff song because I was already familiar with it, but I'd never really listened to it. And I've listened to this album more times than I can count, but what I can say is every time I put this album on, that song always puts me in the same great mood no matter what and captures my entire full attention 100%. Brilliant shit, man. Brilliant. Vocal harmonies, brilliant. The song is amazing. The chord changes. The whole vibe of it, the whole sound it gives, the way it resonates. I can just imagine being in that studio when this was recorded. Imagine how that would have felt to just be in. And what else I can say is a lot of people classify this as a concept album, one of the earliest concept albums. And I agree with it. Brian Wilson and Tony Asher both said they didn't intend for this to be a concept album. Brian didn't, relate the music to any of the other songs. He wasn't trying to do an interwoven thing like he would later do with Smile. But he was taking it to a different direction. And he did want to make an album of all good songs. The uniformity and the concept he wanted was just all good songs with good production, good lyrics that the people could relate to, and it works. And for me, this album just represents growing up, just youthfulness kind of dissolving into more responsibility and adulthood and realizing things and learning about yourself and relationships and love and just things like that, transitions in life. And I think this encapsulates that perfectly. It's a perfect time capsule of life in 35 minutes or 40 minutes or however long it is. And Wouldn't It Be Nice opens it perfectly, followed by You Still Believe in Me, which easily one of Brian's best songs, maybe his most beautiful ever, but he has 20 songs that could be his most beautiful ever. So it's very difficult to say, but it's gorgeous. It sounds almost like Christmas music, even since the first time I've heard it. Sleigh bells, or not the. I don't even know if this. I think that's God Only Knows. I'm forgetting it, man. But just the way it all sounds, all the percussion together, all the different things going on. It's truly just a musical experience. It's brilliant. Brian sings lead Wouldn't Be Nice. He sings lead on You Still Believe in Me. That's Not Me is track 3, sung by Mike. Brian comes in later. Amazing. I love the lyrics. It's so, I once had a dream, so I packed up and split for the city. I soon found out that my lonely life wasn't so pretty. Words are so simple, but they flow so well together, and they're very relatable. And this album's lyrics aren't the most complex you'll ever hear. It's not like it's the most cryptic, deep wordplay kind of thing, but they're just very sincere words that convey true emotions. And That's Not Me is a very personal one. The next one, sang by Brian's, called Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulder. This is, again, maybe the most beautiful song he ever composed, along with almost fucking every other song on this album. Just breathtaking emotion. It's to me, it just embodies the pull at your heartstrings feeling more than anything I've ever heard. With this record, it's not about exactly what chords they're playing or exactly what beat they're doing. It's the whole feeling. It all, as Brian describes it, what he learned from Phil Spector is that the more you can combine things, the more you can put things together. It blends together, and you can make multiple instruments, or you can make one single instrument out of multiple instruments. So this album, to me, and what Brian says as well, it's more a concept album of production rather than a concept album of strictly just songs, but I think it works well as both. That's a brilliant song, by the way. And then I'm Waiting for the Days next. Picks up the energy, high tempo drums, lots of amazing shit within the music. I just love the way they bring back the energy at the end. Honestly, man, I would go so in depth into each of these songs, but there's so many details, and I feel like I would lose track of myself if I tried to say everything I loved about every track. There's so much depth and complexity in this music that it's almost impossible for me to describe it, if you've never heard it. But what I will say is the songs are all great. The lyrics are great. Music is fucking brilliant. And they convey a mood. And the mood gets changed during the album to different things. But I think for someone growing up, or someone who is grown up and thinks back to when they were younger, this album can really reflect a lot of things. Following that is Let's Go Away for a While, an instrumental track. Brian did something fucking remarkable here. It's a complete experience. It's 2.5 minutes, but of just pure musical bliss. There's no words. And it's not like it's just, him playing chords with the basic melody. It's just emotion. Just the way everything works together. Beautiful. One of my favorite pieces of music in the world. Followed by Sloop John B, which was a single they released a couple months before the album. That song went to number 3 on the charts. And they included it on this album. A lot of people, including Bruce Johnston, think that it doesn't fit the theme, that it was the outlier. People have things that they like to say about that. Let me know if you guys don't like or do like the song on the record. Personally, I think it ends side one off perfectly. I think the energy's amazing. The way that they were able to take an old folk song, a traditional song, that had just been done by folk groups, Kingston Trio, because Al brought it to Brian to do the arrangement, but the fact they took something like that and did such a crazy twist on it, Brian's incredible that he was able to put that together. I think it's amazing, and I think it ends that off perfectly. And then side 2 opens with the best song on the record, Brian's possibly greatest song he ever wrote. It's definitely up there, definitely top 10 for sure. God Only Knows, it's an absolute masterpiece. It's pure beauty. It's just pure beauty. I can say it's definitely the most beautiful song I've ever heard. 100%. Besides Surf's Up and a lot of other things, and there's a lot of amazing songs out there. It's hard to say, but I think there's just a certain timeless quality to it that I haven't heard in another song ever. It's great. It's fucking amazing. Remarkable. Listen to it. Assuming everybody knows that song, but if you guys haven't heard that song, if you've never heard this album, check out God Only Knows. Next is called I Know There's an Answer. It was originally titled Hang On to Your Ego, with different lyrics, but Mike Love really didn't like it. He thought it was a drug song about LSD, or a critique of LSD users, so he was like, you know what, man, I don't want this on here, being a fucking petty guy. And, I honestly prefer the lyrics of Hang On to Your Ego, but I prefer Al, Mike, and Brian all do vocals on this one versus Hang On to Your Ego just being Brian. And I think it worked out for the best going to I Know There's an Answer, but Hang On to Your Ego was originally, regardless, it's a very cool song. Very circusy, very cool circusy vibe to this one, and a very spacey, weird, stoner circus. It's very interesting, very interesting vibe it conveys. Cool ass song. Next followed by Here Today, lead vocal by Mike. And I think this one's brilliant. Amazing backing track, amazing instruments. You can hear it playing right now. Chords just flying all over the place. Mike does probably my favorite vocal of their entire career. And I think just musically it's brilliant. You can hear the talking during the bridge, all the guys talking. Brian left it in there. Yeah, Here Today is brilliant. I think Lemmy Kilmister from Motorhead said that song changed his life, which that's pretty cool. Next is the one I have on my shirt. My girlfriend got me this shirt. It's an amazing fucking song. I Just Wasn't Made for These Times. For me, I can say this is... I think it's the greatest song on the album in terms of telling you what the album's about. I think more than any song on the record, it encapsulates the entire mood into one single song. Like, I feel God Only Knows is super beautiful, and so is Don't Talk, Put Your Head on My Shoulder, but both have extremely different moods. One is very, very vulnerable. Both are very vulnerable, but one's a lot more... It's just different, you know? That's one thing about this album, is all these songs have such personal connections to the emotions, you know? For me, at least, I can say in my life as 18 years old, this fucking album, front to back, I cannot believe how much I click to it and relate to Brian Wilson on this whole record. So basically all I'm saying is, you know, all the songs convey different emotion and different moods, but all managed to be that relatable, which is very great. And I Just Wasn't Made for These Times came on right now. It's just a perfect example of what makes Brian Wilson great. If you've never heard his music, or if you've tried to get into it and hasn't clicked with you, if you just want the quickest, easiest way to understand why this dude is a fucking genius at music, just listen to this record. And honestly, I say it's one that's listening to by yourself, on a car ride, in the dark, you know, after a long day, whatever you're doing, it just takes you away. It's alien almost. I had a coworker tell me that. He was like, the Beach Boys are like aliens. They just take you to a different world. And I was like, I completely agree. You can hear the fucking harmonies. You know, they had 4 different harmony melodies going on at once over top a crazy backing track with crazy complex chords, and just some of the most heartfelt and personal lyrics ever written, ever put to, you know, tape. It's really a brilliant track, and it's followed up by another brilliant track, the title track, Pet Sounds, a 2-minute instrumental. Brian planned... Initially, this was titled Run, James, Run, because Brian wanted to be in the next James Bond movie. It got rejected, and he's like, man, what the fuck? So he's like, alright, I'll just put it on the record. So, came second to last, and I think it's brilliant. I think it's totally like a James Bond fucking thing. It could have been in 007, man. Truly a cool-ass tune. Really fucking cool. Lovely energy, love the guitar. This is probably, to me, like, if I have to think most surfy song on the album, most surf rock, this has actually a lot of surf rock vibes, and I think they do a super psychedelic surf rock, movie-sounding fucking cool-ass song there. And finally is the most heartbreaking song on the album, Caroline No. It was released as the first single off this record, Brian Wilson's debut single. It was credited to just Brian Wilson, not the Beach Boys, because they didn't sing on it. Closes off the album, and it's fucking heartbreaking. You know, if you follow the lyrics song for song, it basically goes on the journey of a young teenage boy growing up, going through relationships, going through life, learning, and the final song is basically the girl he is in love with him and her are changing and growing apart, and, you know, he doesn't see the same person in her anymore, and he doesn't feel the same anymore, and it's kind of just like a departure. And hauntingly beautiful song, beautiful vocal from Brian, and it ends off with this the fade out, and then you have the train coming, and then the dogs barking, and it's just like, whoa. It's like the train to a different city, the train to the start of the next part of your life. Like, there goes your childhood, man. And it just really, for what you see on the back cover of the guys playing live in Japan, you know, Brian in the car at the piano, you don't really get too much of a look in here because they didn't put the Wrecking Crew on the back in the pictures or anything, and you know, the only picture you have at the front's the guys at the San Diego Zoo, which apparently they got kicked out of the zoo for throwing carrots at a tiger or something. I don't know. I don't know what happened, man. But that was apparently what happened. But very interesting cover. But you know what? It's pretty fucking cool and far out weird. The outfits are sick. You know, you have the goat with the goats. And then this, on the original copy, if you notice, Sloop John B and Caroline No are both highlighted. That's because they were both released as singles before the album came out. So for people who picked it up, they're like, oh, I know those songs. So it's surprising to see Wouldn't It Be Nice and God Only Knows, you know, not highlighted, but that's just because they hadn't been released yet. Because a lot of the times nowadays, singles are released ahead of albums. And back then they would actually release, for this band, they would release some singles after the albums. So it just depends, you know. I think this, I thought I had the inner original 66 sleeve, but anyway. That's all the songs on the record, and all I can say is they're all brilliant, they're all perfect and unique in their own ways in terms of arrangement, production, vocal harmonies, backing track, the mood, the lyrics, the vibe. Absolutely groundbreaking for the time. And another one of the greatest albums of all time, released the same year, Revolver by the Beatles. I think it's equally as groundbreaking, but they're so different. And that's why I always say, you know, when people try to talk about the Beatles versus the Beach Boys, I think as a complete band, yes, the Beatles were greater. But in terms of just pure musical talent, Brian Wilson had something that I don't think anybody in pop music has ever had. Or music general, where you can just be a one-man unit doing the whole thing yourself. So it's not a competition, and that's what I always think. I always think both accomplished very different things. One as a complete fucking machine of a group, and one as a brilliant genius expressing his heart. And if you compare Revolver, or even Blonde on Blonde by Bob Dylan, or Freak Out by Mothers of Invention, or even The Monks had an album that came out this year. They have a lot of cool albums that came out this year, Mamas and Papas. This album stands apart in a very different way, because I will say it is the most complex, written, orchestrated, very classical, and a lot of people have made the distinction and the connection to this and classical music, things like George Gershwin and, you know, exotica music from the 1930s and, you know, older shit. And you can definitely hear the influence, the Baroque influence, the chamber, you know, the sound of it. It's said to be one of the first chamber pop albums, where just use of reverb and space. You hear a lot of bands doing it now. Animal Collective, Fleet Foxes, Beach House, even Mac DeMarco to an extent, you know, just the way they use sound and atmosphere. And I think this is one of the first examples, if not the first full example, of anybody ever truly doing that. And I think it's really brilliant. I think it's just truly fucking remarkable. I think all the members, even though the Beach Boys themselves didn't really play on here, I think Carl and Dennis played a tiny bit on one song or 1.5 songs or whatever, I don't even know. But it was pretty much all the Wrecking Crew. But regardless of that, regardless of what people think they thought or if they liked it or not, you cannot deny the boys pulled off a world-class harmony performances. World-class harmony performances. Just absolutely ridiculous, layered, reverb-drenched, beautiful fucking harmonies. And I think, you know, compared to their previous albums, they definitely take on a much more complex feeling to them, because they're experimenting a lot more with the pronunciation and the way they project, and truly, it's really, really, really unique, and you just don't hear anything like this. And when Brian Wilson started working on Good Vibrations and the Smile album after this, he started going in different directions, more complex, but I actually would argue that tonally and definitely music theory wise, but also just soundscape wise, this is much more complex and layered than Smile, but it's also not as ambitious. So they're just two very different records that both give off very different moods, and I'll explain, as I said in this review and the next review, my thoughts for each. But why I think this album um, stands out so much from the rest of their catalog is it's because it's not a Beach Boys album. It's a Brian Wilson album. You know, even though he had help from Tony Asher, even Mike Love contributed a little bit, and even, you know, the Wrecking Crew, you know, helped fulfill his vision because, you know, he didn't play everything himself, or he played on some of the songs, but, you know, really, it had been years of practice at that point, and it all culminated, and he was the brains of the operation. He was the man. But the truth is that if you listen to the sessions from that time, you can hear how on his game Brian is. He knew exactly what he wanted, and he was 100% up by it. If they were playing wrong, he'd be like, hey, no, you guys aren't playing that right. Let's take it from the top. Let's do this again. Because he knew he wanted a perfect sound. And I can say, as an aspiring musician myself, who just, you know, makes songs in my room and stuff, there's a lot that goes into creating a track. Even just a track without the vocals. Once you add vocals and you mix it all together, it's a whole nother thing, and it takes a lot of fucking work. So I gotta commend him for being so natural at it and having such a amazing understanding of just how music works. So, yeah, it's easily one of the greatest things I've ever heard in my life. One of my favorite pieces of art. I worship this album. And even Brian himself said it was his first solo album, and, you know, I don't know how much the guys liked it. They supported him, and they trusted him because they knew they weren't talented enough to do this. But I think they probably also did have reservations about it being good and safe for the Beach Boys. And I think maybe it not succeeding as much as Brian expected when it came out commercially, I think that hurt him a lot, and he never really recovered from that because he gave this album his all, and for his country to not fully appreciate the work of, you know, the main songwriter in their greatest band at the time, it made him feel, you know, left out and alone. And that's kind of where he started spiraling, and why he needed to retreat from the music industry as the years went on, you know. So this definitely captured a very special moment for him and the rest of the band. Came together fucking perfectly, and I don't even know what else I have to say about it. If I had to, I can't even rank the songs. Sometimes I would try to rank the songs, you know, say, oh, this one's number 1, this one's number 12, blah, 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 but I don't even know if I can, man. And honestly, for people who aren't into this album, who don't understand it, or just don't like it, you know, obviously, you like what you like, and that's the cool thing about music, is we're all into different shit, but I think listening to the stereo mix of it, with good headphones, in the dark, just paying attention to the instruments, the vocals, what they're saying, just what they're creating, I think that can actually open up a lot of doors for people who haven't really fully heard the album. And, you know, for people who've heard it plenty of times and just don't like it, you know, that's fair, man. We're all into different shit. But I think you can't deny this is an incredibly special and unique album that changed the world when it came out. It's revered for a good reason. It's an absolute masterpiece, and while I do think they never released an album as good as this in their catalog ever again, I do think it's very fucking hard to make an album better than this. And I'd argue 80% of the albums they released after this were good in their own ways. Some even great, some even amazing. And that doesn't discredit them at all. It just means that this is on a whole nother level of music. And I think Brian Wilson was very ahead of his time. And I think he captured something very special that changed the world. And I urge anybody who feels human emotion to listen to this record. If you don't feel human emotion, listen to this record. Maybe you will, because it's very, very nice, man. It's very beautiful, very touching shit. Lovely. And that's about what I have to say about this one, man. You know, for how much I love it, I would want to say a lot more. Honestly. But the truth is, there's so much said about it. And I think I just kind of got to speak my mind on just a little bit of my take. So I very much appreciate you guys watching this review. All these reviews over the last, almost 2 years. I've loved doing them. They've been a really awesome thing. I really appreciate the fans coming together to see what I have to say, and I thank all of you guys for that and for the constant support. So definitely leave your thoughts on this record in the comments, your favorite song, what it means to you, and when you first heard it. And I can't wait to see you guys in the final album ranking. So anyway, Pet Sounds 1966, 10 out of 10. Love you, Brian Wilson, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.